Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the loudest voices around you were never saying anything real, that the world has become an echo chamber of noise, opinions shouted over truth, movement without meaning, and endless performance masquerading as strength. You scroll, you listen, you respond, but somewhere deep inside you feel the quiet ache of something missing. A whisper in the background of your mind asks, when did silence become so unbearable? In every corner of life, noise has become the new currency. The louder you are, the more the world seems to notice. The more you assert, the more you appear to exist. Yet behind this facade, there's a strange emptiness, a void that grows louder the more you try to fill it. And in that emptiness, the rarest thing in modern life reveals itself. A man who chooses silence, not out of fear, not from weakness, but from strength. We call him detached, we call him mysterious, but perhaps what he truly is free. Alan Watts once said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." But what does that mean in a world that thrives on turbulence? What does it mean to stand still when everything demands movement, to remain silent when everyone screams for attention? Is silence merely the absence of sound, or is it a rebellion, a deliberate refusal to participate in the theater of noise? You begin to wonder if the constant need to speak, to prove, to react is not strength at all, but a disguise for insecurity. The men who cannot stop talking, explaining, or defending themselves, are they strong, or are they simply terrified of disappearing into silence? Silence has always been uncomfortable for the weak. It reveals what noise conceals: fear, confusion, and the unsettling awareness of one's own emptiness. To sit in silence is to meet yourself without distraction, to confront the truth that no amount of validation can save you from your own mind. Think of the man who doesn't rush to answer every insult, who doesn't need to justify his every move, the one who listens more than he speaks. In a world addicted to reactions, he is an anomaly, and yet his quiet presence commands more respect than 1,000 shouting voices. Why? Because silence is not passive. It is power restrained. It is strength that doesn't need performance. The world celebrates noise because it's easy. It gives the illusion of control. But silence, that's dangerous. Silence forces reflection. It dismantles illusions. It exposes the fragility of egos built on constant validation. It's no wonder most men run from it. Silence demands self-awareness, and self-awareness demands honesty. But here's the paradox. The stronger you become, the less you feel the need to prove it. The more grounded you are, the less you need to speak. You realize that true strength doesn't shout. It simply is. And perhaps that's why the strongest men, the philosophers, the sages, the warriors of old, always retreated into silence before every great act. There's a moment, somewhere between noise and quiet, where you start to feel something shift. You begin to notice how your thoughts slow down when you stop trying to fill the air, how your mind becomes sharper when you let the world fade into the background. The noise of others no longer holds the same grip on you. You start to see that silence is not a void, it's a mirror, and what it reflects is terrifying to those who've never looked closely enough. So you ask yourself, if noise gives me attention, but silence gives me peace, why do I keep choosing noise? Why do I crave the approval that comes from being heard, rather than the strength that comes from understanding? Maybe strong men aren't silent because they have nothing to say. Maybe they are silent because they've already learned what noise can never teach. And if that's true, if silence is the ultimate sign of strength, then what is the real cost of living in a world that fears it? What happens to a society that mistakes loudness for power and calmness for weakness? What happens when we forget that the quietest minds often hold the deepest truths? Perhaps it's time to rediscover the strength that lies not in words, but in the spaces between them. Because sometimes the loudest statement a man can make is to say nothing at all. The silence of strong men is not born out of indifference. It is forged in the fire of disillusionment. It begins when a man realizes that the noise surrounding him is not merely sound. It is a symptom of something far deeper, a sickness of the collective mind. a desperation to avoid confronting the one truth that terrifies humanity the most, that underneath all the shouting, we are profoundly uncertain of who we really are. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unacknowledged part of the psyche that hides all we reject about ourselves. Modern life, obsessed with expression, does everything to bury this shadow under layers of distraction. Social noise, political outrage, constant entertainment, each serves a single purpose: to drown out the silence where the shadow might speak. And yet, silence is precisely what brings that hidden part into view. This is why silence feels threatening. It is not the quiet that disturbs us, it's what we begin to hear when the noise fades away. Alan Watts often spoke about the illusion of the self, the idea that what we call I is merely a construct, a bundle of thoughts and roles, not a fixed identity. But in a society built on performance, that illusion has become sacred. From the moment a man is born, he is told who he should be: strong, assertive, successful, desirable. The problem is not these ideals themselves, it's the noise that surrounds them. Because to maintain them, he must keep performing, keep proving, keep talking. Silence threatens to strip that mask away, exposing the fragile ego underneath. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this when he wrote about the last man, the comfortable, domesticated creature of modernity who has forgotten how to face the abyss. The last man avoids silence because it reminds him that his existence lacks depth. He fills his life with opinions, distractions, and empty talk. He becomes a prisoner of noise, not because he loves it, but because he fears what might emerge without it. And so, the world becomes a stage where men speak to be seen rather than to be understood. Every word becomes a performance, every opinion a shield against the terror of insignificance. The more they speak, the less they listen. The more they react, the less they reflect. It is a strange paradox. Men have never been louder, yet never felt more unheard. Psychologically, this constant noise is an addiction, a dopamine loop. The brain rewards engagement, validation, and conflict. Every argument, every post, every reaction gives a fleeting sense of importance. But beneath it all, the psyche remains restless, because no amount of external noise can fill an internal void. Jung might say the modern man is at war with his unconscious, the silent part of himself that longs to be acknowledged. And silence, when faced bravely, becomes the battlefield where this war can finally end. Schopenhauer saw this centuries ago when he described human life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Noise, in this view, is the attempt to escape boredom, a refusal to face the stillness that reveals the truth of our condition. But what if boredom is not an enemy, but an invitation? What if the stillness we fear is the very space where transformation begins? Strong men, the ones who choose silence, are not immune to this struggle. They have simply recognized it. They have understood that engaging in the world's noise is a battle that cannot be won. The moment you fight to be heard, you become part of the chaos. Silence, then, becomes a radical act of withdrawal, not of weakness, but of wisdom. When a man stops speaking, he begins to observe. He starts to notice patterns, the way people talk without listening, the way emotions masquerade as reason, the way fear disguises itself as confidence. In silence, he sees what others miss. He learns that most human communication is not about truth, but about self-preservation. Every boast, every complaint, every argument is a cry for validation. This realization can be isolating. The man who sees through the illusion of noise often feels like an outsider. He walks among others, but lives in a different reality, one where meaning is found not in expression, but in awareness. He becomes like the Taoist sage, who understands that those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know. And yet, even this understanding carries danger. Silence can easily turn into cynicism, if not grounded in compassion. The strong man must guard against pride in his quietness, because true silence is not about superiority. It is about alignment. It is the stillness of a man who no longer needs to prove or defend anything. He has made peace with the chaos within himself, and thus, the noise of the world no longer holds power over him. Perhaps that is the root of it all. The world's obsession with noise is not a love of sound, but a fear of self-confrontation, because silence reveals what we truly are, and most people are not ready to meet that truth. So the strong man chooses silence, not as retreat, but as mastery. He does not run from noise, he simply refuses to let it define him. He has seen that the greatest battle is not out there in the chaos of voices, but within, the war between who he appears to be and who he really is. And once that war is over, there is nothing left to say. Silence is power, but power always comes with a price. When a man learns to step back from the noise, to stop performing, stop reacting, stop proving, he doesn't just separate himself from the chaos of others, he begins to see the machinery that drives the world itself. What he discovers is not comforting, because behind all the chatter, all the debates, and all the self-expression lies a deep collective fear, the fear of being nothing. The unseen consequence of living in a noisy world is that people mistake activity for meaning. They fill every second of their lives with sound and movement because stillness feels like death. Society rewards the loud, the visible, the constantly engaged, but in doing so, it creates a culture of performance, one where authenticity becomes secondary to appearance. The man who dares to be silent is seen as dangerous because he refuses to play the game. He cannot be easily controlled, categorized, or manipulated. Alan Watts once said that society suffers because it confuses the symbol with the reality, the menu with the meal, the map with the territory. Today, noise has become that symbol. The louder a person appears, the more alive they seem. But what happens when symbols replace substance, when men no longer live from their center, but from their echo? This is the hidden tragedy of noise. It detaches us from ourselves. Every word spoken without awareness, every argument born from ego, every attempt to be seen without understanding why, slowly erodes our connection to truth. It's not just an external phenomenon, it's an internal corrosion. The mind becomes fragmented, scattered across 1,000 stimuli, unable to rest in stillness. Neurologically, noise overstimulates the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. It triggers anxiety, restlessness, and the chronic need for external validation. The dopamine spikes from attention, engagement, and reaction create. It's an endless loop. The more noise you consume, the more you crave. Silence, then, feels intolerable because it offers no chemical reward, only awareness. And awareness is painful when you've spent your life running from it. Carl Jung wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. In today's world, noise has become the most socially acceptable form of avoidance. You can drown your uncertainty in opinions. You can silence your loneliness with distractions. You can hide your fear of meaninglessness beneath an identity that screams louder than it feels. But none of it fills the void. It only deepens it. The unseen consequence of this is alienation. The more we talk, the less we connect. The more we express, the less we understand. We have mistaken communication for communion. True connection, the kind that nourishes the soul, requires silence, space between words, pauses between thoughts. Yet we live in a time where silence feels like rejection and listening feels like submission. This is why strong men stand out. Their silence acts like a mirror, reflecting the insecurity of those around them. People project onto them, mistaking their calm for arrogance, their distance for coldness. But the truth is far more subtle. The silent man is not detached. He is simply free from the compulsion to react, and that freedom exposes the lack of freedom in others. Imagine walking into a crowded room filled with laughter, arguments, and opinions. You don't speak, you only observe. Within minutes, you can feel the anxiety beneath the surface. Every joke hides a need to belong. Every argument hides a fear of being wrong. Every loud voice hides a small voice inside that was never heard. The room is filled with sound, but empty of presence. This is the world we live in, a world where everyone talks and no one listens. And here lies the most disturbing consequence of noise. It kills wisdom, because wisdom is born from reflection, and reflection is born from silence. A man who cannot be silent cannot, C. He reacts rather than perceives. He becomes a servant of impulse, a puppet of culture, a reflection of whatever noise surrounds him. The result is a society of men who appear strong but are fragile, men who mistake aggression for confidence and volume for conviction. They chase validation through endless speech, never realizing that every word spoken without consciousness drains their inner power. The truly strong man, on the other hand, conserves his words like energy. He speaks only when something inside him compels him to, not when the world demands it. But this path is lonely. Silence separates you from the crowd. It strips away the comfort of shared illusions. It forces you to face the emptiness that others spend their lives escaping. Many turn back at this stage. They break the silence, not because they have something to say, but because they can't bear what the silence reveals. And yet, those who endure it find something extraordinary. They discover that beneath the noise, beneath the chaos, beneath the endless stream of thoughts and opinions, there is a still point, a center that never moves. Alan Watts called it the Watcher, the awareness behind all experience. When a man finds this center, he is no longer shaken by the noise around him. He listens without absorbing, observes without judging, and acts without fear. But here's the paradox. As he becomes freer, the world grows more hostile toward him. Because his silence exposes the madness of the collective, he becomes a reminder of what others have lost, the ability to be at peace within themselves. The unseen consequence of his strength is isolation. Yet within that isolation lies the seed of transcendence. Because once a man learns to find companionship in silence, he is never truly alone again. He walks quietly, but the world feels his presence. He speaks rarely, but his words echo longer. He becomes a pensée, living contradiction in a culture addicted to noise, a man who has nothing to prove and therefore nothing to lose. And that, perhaps, is what the world fears most, the man who no longer needs it. Every rebellion begins not with noise, but with awareness. The moment you recognize the cage, you have already begun to leave it. For the strong man, the rebellion against noise does not take the form of argument or resistance. It is the quiet refusal to participate in illusion. It is the act of reclaiming one's attention from the world's chaos and returning it to the silence within. But how does one break free from something so deeply ingrained, so culturally celebrated, so psychologically addictive? The answer lies not in fighting the noise, but in seeing through it. Alan Watts taught that resistance strengthens what it opposes. The more you push against noise, the louder it becomes. True rebellion, therefore, is not about suppression, but transcendence. It is learning to listen to the noise without being consumed by it, to observe the play of voices, opinions, and emotions without losing yourself in their rhythm. You begin by realizing noise is not the enemy. Identification with it is. Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded city street, horns blaring, people shouting, screens flashing, and yet, within you, there's a stillness that nothing can touch. The sounds continue, the chaos unfolds, but it no longer claims your mind. You have stepped into a deeper awareness, the silent witness behind all movement. This is the first act of rebellion, to witness without reacting. Carl Jung might call this the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. It begins when you stop defining yourself by the external world and start listening to the quiet voice within. That voice is faint at first because it has been buried under years of conditioning. But once you begin to honor it, by spending time in solitude, by reflecting instead of reacting, it grows stronger. Breaking free requires courage, because silence strips away the illusions that comfort us. You will lose people who mistake your calm for coldness, your introspection for arrogance. But this loss is not a punishment. It is purification. Those who depend on noise to feel alive cannot walk with you into silence. There is an ancient strength in choosing solitude. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not as public statements but as private reflections, an emperor speaking only to his own soul. His silence became his strength because it rooted him in reality, not reputation. To rebel, then, is to withdraw your energy from meaningless battles. It is to stop trying to convince, argue, or dominate. You begin to see that the loudest voices rarely understand what they're shouting about. Their noise is not power, it's panic. The strong man observes this and smiles, not from superiority, but from understanding. But rebellion is not isolation, it is transformation. Silence is not the end, it is the beginning of deeper communication. Because when you stop speaking out of compulsion, your words begin to carry weight. Each one becomes deliberate, born from clarity rather than reaction. Alan Watts often compared life to music. The purpose of music is not to reach the final note, but to enjoy the rhythm, the silence between the beats. Likewise, the purpose of silence is not to withdraw from life, but to hear it more fully. When you reclaim silence, you rediscover rhythm. You begin to act from harmony instead of chaos. So how does one practice this rebellion in daily life? Start by observing your impulses to react. Notice how quickly the mind rushes to fill silence with explanation, defense, or noise. Each time you resist that impulse, you strengthen your awareness. Spend time without stimulation. No phone, no music, no distractions. Let the mind settle. At first, the silence will feel unbearable. The ego will fight it, whispering fears of irrelevance or loneliness. But if you stay long enough, something miraculous happens. The noise inside you begins to fade, too. The rebellion is not about silence alone. It's about awakening to a new kind of listening. You begin to hear the subtleties of life that noise once drowned out. The rhythm of your breath, the tone behind someone's words, the quiet pulse of existence itself. The world doesn't become quieter. You simply rise above its frequency. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." In silence, you rediscover that why. You begin to act from purpose instead of pressure. Noise loses its power because it no longer defines your identity. You speak when necessary, act when needed, and rest when silence calls. The rebellion of the strong man is invisible to the crowd because it happens entirely within. It's not a revolution of words, but of consciousness. While others shout for validation, he cultivates presence. While others react to noise, he listens to truth. He has realized that silence is not emptiness, it is awareness, waiting to be heard. And through that awareness, he discovers freedom. Freedom from approval, freedom from reaction, freedom from the need to be seen. He learns that silence is not a withdrawal from life, it is alignment with it. He is no longer a fragment tossed by external forces, but the center from which life unfolds. The true rebellion is not against the world's noise, it is against your own unconscious participation in it. Once you stop feeding it, the noise loses its meaning. You see it for what it truly is, a collective distraction from the silence that holds all answers. To break free, you do not need to destroy the world's noise. You simply need to remember that it has never been stronger than your stillness. And when you do, you'll understand why the strongest men choose silence, not as retreat, but as the ultimate form of resistance. At the end of every search, at the edge of every philosophy, and in the quiet beyond all understanding, a man eventually encounters what he has been running from all along, himself. Silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is the mirror that reveals the truth of being, and for the strong man, this realization changes everything. You begin to see that silence was never about discipline, withdrawal, or stoicism. It was always about returning to what you truly are, the awareness behind the noise, the consciousness that exists before thought. All along, the noise of the world was not an external enemy, but a reflection of your own restless mind. And when you finally sit in silence long enough, when you allow the stillness to swallow the chaos, you realize there was never anything to fight. Alan Watts often spoke of the illusion of separation, the idea that we are isolated selves moving through a world of others. But silence dissolves that illusion. In the depth of stillness, the boundaries between you and everything else begin to blur. You feel it, the strange, humbling awareness that the same consciousness that looks through your eyes is the same that moves the wind, the waves, the stars. The same silence that fills the universe fills you. This is the ultimate truth. Silence is not just strength, it is unity. When you stop speaking, the world starts speaking back in ways you never noticed before. You hear the rhythm in every movement, the intelligence in every event. You start to see that what you called chaos was never random. It was a symphony you were too distracted to hear. The noise of the world did not hide truth. It was truth, distorted through the static of the human mind. Strong men discover that silence is the highest form of communication, not because it hides meaning, but because it transcends it. Words can only point toward truth, but silence allows you to feel it directly. In silence, there is no debate, no need for defense, no victory or defeat, only understanding. And this is where the paradox resolves itself. The man who once sought silence as refuge now sees that it was never about escaping noise, it was about awakening through it. The external world remains as loud as ever, but inside there is peace. The noise no longer defines him because he no longer defines himself by anything. He becomes like the still surface of a lake, reflecting everything, disturbed by nothing. Carl Jung would say, this is integration, the moment when the conscious and unconscious mind become one. The shadow no longer threatens you because you have looked into it and found your own face staring back. The things you feared in silence, emptiness, insignificance, loneliness, were illusions. What you mistook for nothingness was actually presence, vast and infinite. Nietzsche might have called it the moment of amor fati, the love of fate. When you stop fighting the noise, stop resisting the flow of life, you begin to love everything as it is, even the chaos. The strong man realizes he does not need to impose order on the world. He only needs to remain unmoved within it. His silence is not detachment, it is harmony. The greatest irony is that in finding silence, he also finds his voice. Not the voice of the ego that needs to be heard, but the voice of truth that speaks through him. When he finally speaks, his words carry the weight of mountains because they come from stillness, not struggle. His presence itself becomes a language, a communication beyond speech. This realization transforms his understanding of strength. He sees that the true warrior is not the one who conquers others, but the one who conquers his own mind. He realizes that all wars are reflections of the inner war. Every conflict, every division, every act of violence begins in the noise within. Silence, therefore, is not passivity. It is peace made conscious. He understands, finally, what Alan Watt has meant when he said, "You are the universe playing hide and seek with itself." The search for strength, for peace, for meaning, was always the universe's own longing to know itself. And silence is the moment it remembers. From this awareness, everything changes. The need to prove fades. The desire to control dissolves. The fear of being forgotten disappears. Because in silence, you realize that you were never separate, never small, never lost. You were the silence itself, the eternal background against which all sounds arise and fade. And when this realization dawns, it is both liberation and homecoming. You no longer chase stillness, you are stillness. You no longer seek power, you are power. You no longer fight noise. You see that even noise is made of silence, just as waves are made of water. The man who reaches this understanding walks through life with a quiet grace. He no longer rushes, he no longer competes. His silence is not the silence of suppression, but of knowing. He does not need to be understood, because he understands. He does not need to win, because there is nothing left to lose. He becomes what ancient mystics and sages described for centuries, the man who has become one with the Tao, the Logos, the Source. His silence is not absence, it is fullness. It radiates peace, strength, and understanding wherever he goes. People feel his presence even when he says nothing, because his silence speaks to the silence in others. And that is the final realization, the truth that ends all searching. That silence was never empty. It was always everything. And the strongest men do not choose silence to escape the world. They choose it because in silence they have finally found it. And this is where the paradox resolves itself. The man who once sought silence as refuge now sees that it was never about escaping noise, it was about awakening through it. The external world remains as loud as ever, but inside there is peace. The noise no longer defines him because he no longer defines himself by anything. He becomes like the still surface of a lake, reflecting everything, disturbed by nothing. Carl Jung would say, this is integration, the moment when the conscious and unconscious mind become one. The shadow no longer threatens you because you have looked into it and found your own face staring back. The things you feared in silence, emptiness, insignificance, loneliness, were illusions. What you mistook for nothingness was actually presence, vast and infinite. Nietzsche might have called it the moment of amor fati, the love of fate. When you stop fighting the noise, stop resisting the flow of life, you begin to love everything as it is, even the chaos. The strong man realizes he does not need to impose order on the world. He only needs to remain unmoved within it. His silence is not detachment, it is harmony. The greatest irony is that in finding silence, he also finds his voice. Not the voice of the ego that needs to be heard, but the voice of truth that speaks through him. When he finally speaks, his words carry the weight of mountains because they come from stillness, not struggle. His presence itself becomes a language, a communication beyond speech. This realization transforms his understanding of strength. He sees that the true warrior is not the one who conquers others, but the one who conquers his own mind. He realizes that all wars are reflections of the inner war. Every conflict, every division, every act of violence begins in the noise within. Silence, therefore, is not passivity. It is peace made conscious. He understands, finally, what Alan Watt has meant when he said, "You are the universe playing hide-and-seek with itself." The search for strength, for peace, for meaning, was always the universe's own longing to know itself. And silence is the moment it remembers. From this awareness, everything changes. The need to prove fades. The desire to control dissolves. The fear of being forgotten disappears. Because in silence, you realize that you were never separate, never small, never lost. You were the silence itself, the eternal background against which all sounds arise and fade. And when this realization dawns, it is both liberation and homecoming. You no longer chase stillness, you are stillness. You no longer seek power, you are power. You no longer fight noise. You see that even noise is made of silence, just as waves are made of water. The man who reaches this understanding walks through life with a quiet grace. He no longer rushes, he no longer competes. His silence is not the silence of suppression, but of knowing. He does not need to be understood, because he understands. He does not need to win, because there is nothing left to lose. He becomes what ancient mystics and sages described for centuries, the man who has become one with the Tao, the Logos, the Source. His silence is not absence, it is fullness. It radiates peace, strength, and understanding wherever he goes. People feel his presence even when he says nothing, because his silence speaks to the silence in others. And that is the final realization, the truth that ends all searching. That silence was never empty. It was always everything. And the strongest men do not choose silence to escape the world. They choose it because in silence they have finally found it.